What are your hip flexors and why is it important that we stretch them? Your hip flexors, they are muscles that attach from your hip all the way to your spine. They involve multiple muscles, a few of which involve your quadriceps and your iliopsoas and iliacus. There's a few others involved, but those are some major ones that we're going to talk about today. Why are they important? Because they help us flex our hips, and they also give a little bit of core stability. Believe it or not, some of these muscles, they attach deep into your lumbar spine on the transverse process of that vertebra, and they help develop and contribute to that core stability. But what if they're really tight? So if your hip flexors are really tight, what happens is your legs want to stay in hip flexion. Our everyday lives involve a lot of sitting. I'm going to squat just to demonstrate that. So if I'm sitting all day, my hips are always in hip flexion, especially if I have a sedentary job, or if I'm in school, or if I have a day off and I'm relaxing on the computer. Our hips are in a lot of flexion because we're sitting. So when our hips are always flexed and we don't stretch out, when we stand up, your hips want to stay flexed, right? So what does that look like? If your body is trying to keep your hips in hip flexion when you're standing, that can look like this. Because these muscles, they attach, again, from your spine all the way to your leg, right? So if my legs are in hip flexion and I try and straighten up that hip, but my back, which is where they touch, doesn't want to let it stay tight, it's going to extend here. Because what does that do? That keeps that angle here of hip flexion. Why is that a bad thing? So if your hips are always in hip flexion and you're not getting that full hip extension here, you're not able to tuck that pelvis and keep your hips straight and your back neutral, that's going to change the entire length tension in your back and your core and your hips, also in your pelvic floor. If you imagine, if I'm walking like this all day, turn to my arms so you can see it, or when I stand, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to get a lot of pain in my lumbar spine because every time I try and extend and stand straight, it's not coming from my hips, it's coming from my back. So look at the difference between me trying to stand up straight with my hips in hip flexion because they're tight, and me trying to get straight because my hips can achieve a neutral position. Do you see the difference? So here, I have no pain. Here, I have pain. Right? So let's do it one more time. This is straight, being able to keep my hips in neutral, and this is tight hip flexors. There could be other things going on, but generally speaking, we're going to keep it at tight hip flexors.